Boardroom Bound, episode 159, The Evolving Landscape of Public Company Boards with Dawn Zier.
Nothing is going to beat networking. The way it works, as chair of NomGov, I'll let you in on a secret, is generally you go around the room and you ask everybody else on the board who do they know, and that begins to create the starter list of people. So networking with people you know, and as simple as telling people that you know that you want to be on a board is very, very important.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we're speaking with Dawn Zier. She is an independent board director and accomplished CEO, best known for engineering the remarkable turnaround of Nutrisystem. She serves on multiple public company board roles, including Spirit Airlines, which I'm sure we all know. And she's now a professional board member, and she has some amazing stories, including her perspective chairing nominating governance committees. Before we jump into today's show, I'd like to share a message from our sponsor about director certification. Want to join your first board, or are you looking for additional board seat opportunities? In either scenario, be sure to be disciplined in your approach. Now, through the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Coaching and Certification course, you get both modern board director candidate packaging and modern board operations knowledge integrated within one program. Remember, the key to landing additional or your first board seat is in your packaging. Make the effort to do it right. Program graduates also receive their globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation upon course completion. It's designed for individuals and groups. You can learn more at bit.ly/IBDC-D. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/IBCDC-D. And now let's jump into the show. Dawn Zier, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you on the show today. You have such a wonderful story that's going to resonate with our audience about your board experience and how you got there, but I don't want to jump too far into it because first we need to understand about the amazing experience you had in the C-suite and the corporate world that built up and enabled this. So why don't you begin by sort of sharing about your career experiences and how it began before you got to the boardroom?
Okay, great. Well, I spent 20 years at Reader's Digest, so I'm an engineer by training, and then I decided that I really didn't like being an engineer and went into marketing and spent 20 years at Reader's Digest and really rose up in the corporation where my final job there was as president of International. At that point, while I was happy at Reader's Digest, I got tapped by Spencer Stewart to talk to people at Nutrisystem. And, you know, the importance of networking is critical because there were three people that I had met at Reader's Digest and worked with that had recommended that I be spoken to for the job at Nutrisystem. And when I got approached, I interviewed, I got the offer, and I loved it. And one of the most interesting things that happened to me was analysts and investors would say, hey, what's a person with a publishing background doing at a healthcare weight loss company? And it really came down to data analytics and the science and the marketing behind it and the need to do a turnaround at Nutrisystem. So I went there and I did that. And at that point, really what hit me hard was the importance of culture and how important that is not only in the C-suite but also in the boardroom.
So clearly already we're getting a hint of your brand and your reputation and what you're known for, and I'm sure that's going to play into the boardroom space as well because it's probably going to shock the world when we start talking about the first major board seat you landed on was for a major airline, right? Which many people would go, I don't get that, I don't see how it fits, but I think you've already started to give us a bit of a breadcrumb trail there when you talk about going from Reader's Digest to Nutrisystem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in 2015, I had been at Nutrisystem for 2 years, and in January 1st, part of my to-do list, one of my New Year's resolutions was to get on a public company board. So I began working it hard, and I got contacted by a search firm that was doing a placement for Spirit Airlines. And when I went to speak with them, I thought, this is odd because I fly like everybody else does. I have international experience and spent a lot of time on airplanes, but other than that, don't know the ins and outs of a very capital-intensive business. But what they were looking for actually was for somebody to help shift their brand image and to really be in touch with the customer experience, which is what I spend a lot of time doing. I think, like Jeff Bezos used to say, the customer has to have a seat at the table. And that's what Spirit needed, and I think I helped bring that conversation front and center for them. And I've been on the board now for, 6 years, and it's been great.
What a wonderful story that we can probably grab a real snippet of to say, it's not about finding a board seat, it's finding about the match for the board seat. And while you might not have thought, well, airlines are probably the place I should be looking when you made your to-do list, it's the right opportunity using your skill set. And probably, I'm going to guess sort of what I tell people is having a 50-50, where you bring background experience that they need, but also spaces for you to learn and grow and develop. Is that how you think about it now that you've got a sort of portfolio of board and you get other opportunities put in your way?
Yes, one of the things I love and that I pride myself on is being a connector of dots across industries. So I love to connect the dots across industries, and every board that I work on or that I'm a part of is in a different industry. But I'm never in a board meeting where I don't hear something that is relevant to one of the other boards or one of the other companies that I'm working with. So it's interesting how you really can connect the dots, and I think that provides a lot of value because you want to bring different perspectives, and I think a diverse industry experience really helps to do that.
And Dawn, I would like to highlight something for our audience because you said, well, about the beginning of 2015, you said, I want to make this happen, public company board seat. And within, about 6 months, you had made that happen. That is an incredibly rapid experience to be able to make that happen. It's possible, not the norm. We should set expectations. So give people some guidance and thoughts about what it actually normally should feel like and perhaps why yours was just so amazingly accelerated.
Yes, I was fortunate because I was a sitting CEO and had been at the helm of Nutrisystem for a couple of years, and we had had a lot of success. So I was kind of on the radar, which was helpful. I do think it's not easy to get your first paid board seat or your first public company board seat, and often it's easier to get a private placement. So what I encourage people to do is network. Nothing is going to beat networking. The way it works, as chair of NomGov, I'll let you in on a secret, is generally you go around the room and you ask everybody else on the board, who do they know? And that begins to create the starter list of people. So networking with people you know, and as simple as telling people that you know that you want to be on a board is very, very important. And then, of course, we have to broaden our reach beyond just the people that we know, and that's when you go to search firms and ask them to add people to the board that might make sense. But it's hard to go directly into a public company board seat as your first board. What I like to tell people to do is, and what I actually did when I was at Reader's Digest was I joined a association board. So I was on the Data and Marketing Association board. And what I loved about that was it was a large board because it was an unpaid role. It was voluntary, and it was a large board. I think there were 30 people on it. But what I found through that experience, the benefit I got was that I was 2 degrees of separation from everybody in the data and marketing and analytics industry. So I had an immediate network on hand that I tap into still today. And it's not difficult to get on a board where you volunteer, and that gives you some experience. The other thing that I think people are looking for is it's not just about the public companies. There's a lot of private equity companies out there that are looking for operators who can sit on boards, and that's another avenue to go before you get on a public board. People have different paths. My path is one of many, but I find that the other ways might be easier in some instances.
And you're absolutely right. There's exponentially more opportunities in the private than in the public board seat space. And you said something before. I just want to come back to you talking about how Spencer Stewart was the one who was recruiting and got you over to Nutrisystem. Now, I'm sure when you say one of the Shrek firms, everyone's sort of ears perk up like, oh, those are exactly the kind of people that I need to meet. They're the ones who put the people on the board seats. And you're chairing a NomGov. You can tell us that's is a sort of true, but not the full truth, right? More people are placed without the search firms, them being on their radar. And it's so hard to be someone who's on their radar unless you are, as you talked about, being a sitting CEO. So what advice would you give to people going in the back of their mind, like, that should be where I focus, that's my network? Would you actually say do something else? Don't think about them, think about the people that are in your network who actually know you and trust you is the best place to start?
Yes, I think of the people in your network and reach out to people that they know. So introductions are really important. Again, as I said, the conversation starts with the nominating and governance committee, and it often is, who do you know, to get that starter list going. And then there are many search firms out there that one can reach out to, and it's helpful to have relationships with them, and you can reach out and do that. But a lot of placements are people that you know or people that are recommended to you, and that's critically important. Also, if you're a diverse candidate that's looking to get on a board, one of the things that I like to tell people is that if you get the seat, know that it will be because you are qualified. Because I think what we have is sometimes a woman gets on a board or a diverse candidate, and they wonder, why did I get on this board? Did I get on the board to fill a quota? And I can tell you there's not a public company I know that will bring in a candidate that isn't qualified. And then we do look for diversity because it's important, because a diverse thought does make stronger companies, stronger operating results, stronger boards. But that is something that does not replace being qualified. So if you are a diverse candidate, you get on a board, it's because you belong there, and don't feel shy about that.
And I have someone who's a very successful board member like yourself, portfolio board roles, and she is a diverse candidate. And she said to me, whenever I'm being approached for another board seat, and I go through the interview process, I very clearly ask them, what is it specifically about me that you thought that I brought that you wanted to talk to me, so that she knew why they were approaching her. As diversity might have been a factor, but of course, everyone on the final candidate list is a great fit for the role. But what was specific about me? And I like the way that she phrased it.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
And Dawn, so you've gone through this opportunity where you're sitting CEO. Let's put this in the timeline, and now you've got a public company board seat. So you checked that off. You did that 2015 list, but at some point it sounded like you probably got an itch. You thought, I should do another one of these because you got another public company board role while you were still a sitting CEO. So talk us through that process and how it went. And obviously your time was probably very hard to get as it was anyway.
Well, that's interesting because it goes back to what we just talked about, which is networking and having authentic relationships with people. So I wasn't looking for a second board, and I got approached by Hain Celestial, who was undergoing a lot of change in the boardroom. And the way they got my name was from my IR firm, the investment relations firm that I was working with through Nutrisystem, as well as separately through one of the bankers that we were working with. So again, my name got put in front of them by two separate people that they trusted. So again, it talks about the importance of networking and why it's so important to maintain those relationships.
And I think you said it very well in the beginning. It's not just who you know, that they know that this is what you're looking for, because then they can be thoughtful about you. And you think about people who are in the boardroom who aren't board members, but the consultants, the advisors, the accountants, all those different people, the lawyers who just happen to know what opportunities are going on, because no one's ever going to publicly put out there that they're a public company board role is hiring for a board seat, right? That is quiet conversations that happen out there. As much as you feel comfortable, if you could sort of pull back the curtain in the Nom-Gov committee, what does that conversation look and feel like? Do you have the board composition matrix and you're thinking, well, based on what we're going to be doing in the future, we need a person of these qualifications because we know this person over here will probably be retiring in a few years. We need to fill that background. What does that look like at the beginning of the outset when you're trying to figure out the type of board person you need to bring in?
Yes. We do a lot of time, we spend a lot of time talking about how do we put together a highly functioning board. And by highly functioning, what I mean is one that's independent yet collaborative. And what people on the board are looking for is people that you want to work with that can add value. And a divided board is a dysfunctional board. That doesn't mean that you're not independent. It doesn't mean that you don't offer independent point of views. But at the end of the day, you want to be a board that is collaborative and enjoys working together. One of the things that we look for when interviewing people is the ability to listen, to ask questions, and stay strategic. We want generalists, someone that has a working knowledge across an entire enterprise, yet we also value functional expertise. So we put together, every board that I'm on will put together a board skill set and gaps chart. and we look at what is the strategy of the company, what functional expertise do we have on the board, what gaps do we have, and where do we want to add people, and what type of person are we looking for. Sometimes it could be we need international experience. Sometimes it could be digital experience. And, it's easy for boards. Most boards have a CEO and a CFO on their boards. Financial acumen, crisis management, these are the staple items that boards historically have been comprised of, people that have sat in those top C-suite roles. But now other roles are becoming very important to us. If we look at the disruption this year with supply chain, a lot of the boards I sit on want supply chain expertise. Culture, you never want to be that Wall Street Journal headline.
Right.
So culture, and especially people issues, are becoming front and center. And now boards are taking it as their responsibility to provide oversight for the culture of a company. So sometimes HR talent might be needed. And then, of course, ESG is a huge topic right now, the environmental, social, and governance issues. And looking for somebody that has expertise in ESG is very important. So there's a lot of ways people can get on boards, and I think that's exciting because no longer it's that you have to be a sitting CEO or a CFO. We're looking to go deeper into the organization. And we're also looking to make sure that the board is representative and looks like our customers. So diversity, gender, race, age, that mimics what our customers look like is also important.
Right, and you can imagine the photo in the annual report is a snapshot of it, doesn't capture everything. And I'd love
Right.
if you could comment, because you've been on both sides of the table here. I'll call it the due diligence process. And it's probably the hardest the first time you go through it because you're trying to figure out how it works. If you talk about cultural fit, I know that works both ways. I make it akin to dating in my mind. You want to make sure it's going to be a successful fit for the person who's looking to join the board and the board looking for the person. And in my opinion, that's one of the things that's going to be the final decider between someone who is a tie for the best person. Are they the great cultural fit? But when you were going through landing your first seat at Spirit Airlines, and then later when you took your second public company board role, what was it look like for you trying to figure out the due diligence to make sure this is a great place that you could shine and your first few board opportunities are going to be so successful that you knew more would come later?
I think that's interesting, and I'll jump to my second board because I think that really is an interesting story where there was an activist on my second board that I joined, and I didn't come in through an activist slate. I came in through management. But one of the things that attracted me to the board, shows that I really don't run away from tough situations, was that there was an activist on the board. And today, when you look at a lot of public companies, activists and investor involvement in the boardroom is here to stay. And I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to join a board that has an activist on it, because then I could learn his playbook and could learn from him in terms of what they were looking for. So I would be prepared when an activist came in, if an activist were to come into other companies that I was involved in. So that's a little different. Most people don't go courting joining an activist board, but I thought it would be a great learning experience for me. So it depends on how gutsy you want to be. But for me, that was a wonderful opportunity. And turns out that board, quickly, we did a lot of changes. That board became highly functioning. Our CEO at that board had tremendous success at turning around the company, and we created tremendous shareholder value.
Well, I have never heard anyone actively going to an activist situation to learn and grow, but I love the long-term knowledge play that's coming from that. I'm sure that makes you even more attractive for the future, but kudos to you. That's really incredible there. And I wonder if we can use this as a sort of a segue to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of observations for first-time directors. I'm sure there's sort of a do's and don'ts playlist that board members maybe don't understand, or mistakes that are made, things that we should be aware of that we can avoid. Not that you went through those, but you're seeing that as well as you're onboarding other members into your boards, and you're trying to avoid them, and some things you want to double down on that work really well. Would love your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things early on when I was joining boards was, understanding how an operating role and board roles are different. And this is really important when landing your first board position, and to understand, for example, a board resume and bio is different from an operating resume and bio. And a lot of people looking to get on their first board don't understand that difference. Similar content, but different placement and weightings. And directors are not looking for you to prove your expertise like they would for an operating role. They're looking, again, for fit and style, strategic thought process, communication style, ability to navigate through tough situations. And one feedback I got early on was don't oversell yourself because it actually makes you seem more junior and less confident. Instead, do your homework on the company, spend time asking questions and offering perspectives that demonstrate your ability to be strategic and understand the issues facing the company. And I think that that's really important because too often when a first-time board member gets in the boardroom, they don't understand that the job of the board is to ask the right questions and not find the solution. It's to help ask the right questions to guide the leadership team to find the solution. And often when you're new to the boardroom, you're trying to establish your own credibility, and you need to be aware of being concise, for example. No filibustering in the boardroom. And I would say this is especially a watch out for female directors. Now, this may be generalizing, but I've seen in my career that a lot of female directors will go in and not give very concise answers or concise thought. And it's really important that you learn how to be precise and concise in the boardroom. Stay above the weeds. You know, if you're coming in and you're coming in for your functional expertise and not necessarily somebody that's had broad range CEO or CFO experience, there tends to be there's a tendency to go deep and into the weeds. But our job as directors is to stay at 10,000 feet, maybe 5,000 feet. I'm sure you've heard of the expression "noses in, hands out."
Right.
So, ask the questions, but don't dig too deep. And then one of the things I think is important is to establish a relationship with each director independently as well as the CEO. And when you're doing things right when the CEO reaches out to you off-cycle for advice or input. So my goal when I come on to a board is not only to be a director, but to become, and this has to be earned, to become a trusted advisor and sounding board for the CEO, because that just makes the board work so much more fun and you feel like you're contributing in a very robust way.
Now that's wonderful guidance and advice, and it must be so hard for many first-time board members because you were successful by doing over your career. That's how you got to the C-suite, and suddenly to change your methodology and approach. And it must also be hard to think about you're surrounded by many other smart people around that boardroom. It's probably like baseball where you only get to make a few really good questions or comments a day because there's time for everybody else, right? We have to give the airtime to our fellow board members.
And you can't go through a board meeting saying, well, I did this, I did that. That turns deaf ears very quickly. You really, again, have to be offering suggestions and questions, but it can't be, oh, well, this is what Dawn did or this is what somebody else did. You want to keep it, again, about the specifics of what you did. Many board members did 10, 15 years ago. So it might not even be that relevant to share those experiences, but it is very relevant to come equipped with the right questions that's going to allow for a robust analysis of a situation.
Right. And Dawn, we've talked about how you were a sitting CEO and these first two public board seats opened up for yourself. So you have that experience. And then the firm was sold and you eventually exited after the post-merger integration was completed. And now you've transitioned to what I will call professional board member. We have a portfolio, you've picked up several more opportunities. Talk about what that was like for you, where you said, okay, I realize this is the path I want to go down now, rather than back being in the CEO seat, and what that was like, and perhaps how the process changed, if at all.
It was interesting, and I had to ponder that a lot to decide what I wanted to do, because as a public company CEO, you really can't sit on more than one or two boards max. And so when I added a third board, I kind of was making a commitment to that was the path I was going to go down for the time being. And for me, it was a great experience. The interesting thing, though, was doing it during COVID and joining two public company boards and a private board in the middle of COVID, where I didn't meet my colleagues till a year later in person.
And the world has changed quite a bit from COVID, still changing. I'm positive of that. And the boardroom has changed dramatically. I have some friends who said, I was able to pick up another board seat because I'm not spending all the time traveling anymore. It was such wasted time. And hopefully they will still be able to manage that well once travel comes back. You've seen some changes from, say, your time at Spirit Airlines, where you've been there 6.5 years on the board of that. And I'd love if you'd reflect a bit about how things have changed, your experience, and thinking about as you bring on new board members, but also let's take it into the future. When you think about what's the future of the boardroom look like, things have changed so much now. Some of that stuff's not going to go back to the way it was. We're going to keep that, but other things will continue to adapt. What do you think is coming down the pike?
I think there were lessons learned by the pandemic that are things we should bring forward with us into the boardroom of the future and not just revert back to the pre-pandemic ways of meeting 4 or 5 times a year in person. I do think it's hard to have an 8-hour Zoom meeting. People Zoom out. But I do think that one of the things that I found to be very effective, because we were in crisis mode with many of the companies, during the pandemic, you were either a winner or loser, if you will, because of the pandemic. And a lot of companies were in crisis. So the best CEOs leaned into their boards as a strategic asset during this time. And what I found is that we were having on some of my boards more frequent, shorter meetings and less presentation and more conversation. So an 8-hour board meeting often has a lot of presentation and doesn't really solicit a back and forth dialogue. It's more the management team talking at you and explaining things. And I found during the pandemic, when we were dealing with crisis related issues, we got on a call and we really talked, immediately cut to the chase, talked about what the business issues were, what was keeping the CEO up at night, what were the top concerns, and how we were going to tackle it. And again, I found that my CEOs during this time really looked at their boards as their sounding board and strategic advisors, because let's face it, there was no playbook for what we were all going through.
Right.
And board members get paid a decent amount to serve on a public company board and private company boards. So it's best to utilize these board members as more than a 4 or 5 time a year engagement, but also as consultants for the business and sounding boards. And that's my perspective. So I'm hopeful that the future of the boardroom incorporates some of those positives that came out of the pandemic. I also think, as we're looking to the future of the boardroom, that more investor perspectives are going to continue to be present in the boardroom. Shareholder representations, whether that be an activist or other. So again, I refer back to my earlier experience being on a board with an activist that actually was very, very constructive. Sometimes it can be more of a distraction, but in this case it turned out to be a constructive experience is important. But we have to, as board members know how to navigate that and navigate some of these outside pressures coming in from shareholders who are owners of the company. And I also think the future of the boardroom is going to have more of a focus, and should have more of a focus, on some of the softer areas that actually can drive growth in EBITDA. For example, culture and talent, I think, is a big one, because I certainly believe that culture is the foundation that unlocks the success and growth of a company. And the other thing that board members are going to have to get very fluent in is ESG. And I think originally, probably 2 years ago, we didn't really know how to handle this or what to do, and we viewed ESG as a cost of doing business going down the road. But if we flip our mindset and think of it as something that will promote growth within a business and pick the things in ESG that align with the company's missions and values, it actually becomes not a cost, but a driver of growth, value, retention, and engagement.
Potential differentiator for sure. And it's interesting, every board member I talk to, depending on what industries they serve in, or perhaps even individual companies, ESG is covered so differently. It might be by a different committee, it might be a different approach. Obviously, the words in the finance industry where I'm from mean different things to different spaces. And you sit on multiple boards, and ESG is probably a topic of conversation in all of them. There are probably some things that are very similar about how we think about it, how we engage it, but probably also very big differences. So what advice would you give to our audience thinking, like, as they try to wrap their arms around ESG and how they should be best thinking about that to be successful in the boardroom?
We hired, in some cases, we happen to have an expert on our boards, on 2 of my boards that actually have very strong ESG expertise. And then in other cases, we've actually brought in some outside help to really think through the strategy going forward and how to, again, align it with the company. because it makes sense for an airline to do something that might not make sense for a food company to do, for example, or a pharmaceutical company. So really understanding where the ESG agenda items align and where your company can make specific impact is really important. And I found that it was helpful to get some outside help there. Also, it's not just about the ISS score. It's about really understanding what the standards are and making commitments. ISS is only the first part. That's the easy part. But it's really making sure we have the standards and the goals in place to really drive change. But I can tell you, when my companies have really begun to embrace ESG, the impact on the employees is fantastic because they want to be part of that positive change that you're promoting. And if companies align some of their mission and values to the ESG platform, it really is something that the younger generation is looking for in their companies, and it is a real key retentive tool.
Well, Dawn, I think part of the brand and reputation of yourself, we talked about at the beginning of the show, that marketer at heart, I can see that coming through. And I can tell it's very genuine and very clear, right? So you can see in many ways some of the value that you're bringing to the boards and how they can use this not only to benefit society and the company, the employees, the shareholders, the customers. So we were delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Dawn Zier. It was fantastic to hear what it was like to go from the C-suite to land a board seat. Remember, she had said in the beginning of 2015, I want to get a public company board seat. And within 6 months, she had done so. I'm not sure that's the timeline that most of us can adhere to, but great to hear her experience and what it was like expanding then to a portfolio of board roles. Remember to head over to podcast.gordon.edu where you can get links to all of today's resources. Please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to Boardroom Bound.